Welcome to Conversations in Education. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Torres Rodriguez, Superintendent of Harford Public Schools. Today, we present part one of our series, Great Schools for All Students, a 5-part series about school district redesign in Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford is redesigning a school district, and our series will delve into the most crucial guiding principles behind the district models we will be presenting to the Board of Education for their vote. The changes that will be made in our district impact every family and student, our teachers and school staff, our community partners, and our neighborhoods. The guiding principles around which we are redesigning the district include great teaching and learning in every school, expanded family and community partnerships, safe and equitable access to great schools and pathways, fiscal sustainability, and student, family, and community-centered redesign process. Great teaching and learning in every school means that all schools will have the resources, staff, and district support they need to help students achieve their academic potential. To discuss great teaching and learning, today I welcome our guests, Dr. Tarisha Stone, Principal of Rawson School, Dr. June Sellers, Harford Public Schools Executive Director of Student Supports, and Monica Quiñones, Executive Director of English Language Learners and Interim Principal at Naylor School. Welcome to you all. So, Dr. Stone, I'm going to begin by asking you a question that's connected to a recent assessment from the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment that pointed out that measuring school quality only using one data-based point based on test scores, that it creates this, what they called an impoverished conversation about public education, about school quality, in which, we are talking about schools as if they're uniformly good or bad. And so I wonder what you think about the fact that, people think that we have complete knowledge of schools based on one single data point, for example. So what, in your opinion, as the principal of an urban pre-K through 8 school, what do you define as quality school and great teaching and learning?
Well, first, I think that we make a mistake by delineating urban schools that are great from suburban schools that are great. I think all schools that are great have some of the same components. And first, they all focus on student learning. So any school that has a high percentage of students who are meeting the benchmarks in reading and math seem to be the schools that are performing well, that are good schools. But a great school is one where all students have access to high instruction, high achievement. There's a great environment so that students, staff, and families are working together. There's discourse among students. When you walk into the classroom, you can see that students are safe, they're respectful, they feel that they belong to the community, the school community that they're engaged in. But overall, a great school is one that uses multiple measures to measure whether or not students are learning and students are being prepared.
So you touched upon one of the guiding principles, which is great teaching and learning in all of our schools. And you also talked about the fact that all students, right, would experience that. And so, as I think about the very different students that we have, right? We have a variety of students with a variety of needs and actually many, many strengths. I'll ask you, Monica, as the director of our English Language Learners program, how do you measure great teaching and learning for our English learners and for English speakers?
So, interesting question. I agree with Dr. Stone when she says of all the great things that we expect from schools. Our expectations for our English learners are the same. We expect good teaching and learning for all of our students. The difference, and there isn't a difference in the sense that we all want to make sure that they're all honored, valued for their diversity. That's the key.
So, honoring diversity. So let's think about the fact that we have what people call subgroups, right? What we call subgroups. We have our students that are free and reduced lunch, that subgroup. We have our English learners, we have our special education students. And so Dr. Sellers, as the executive director of our student support programming in our school district, what are your roles and responsibilities? And two, I'm wondering, since you are essentially charged with ensuring that each of our schools provides great teaching and learning to also our special needs students, what do you think about when we mention restructuring? What recommendations do you have for us?
Okay. Well, first I'll talk about my roles and responsibilities. Yes. Obviously, the day-to-day operations of the special education department related to compliance, related to special education law, related to our programs, our specific programs for specific student populations, our services, our related services, occupational therapy, physical therapy. Obviously, the day-to-day operations are something that that I oversee. But what I see as my broader role, and in being a part of the redesign of the district, is to make sure that when we say all, when we're talking about focusing on all students and making sure that we have equitable opportunities for each and every student, equity and excellence, that all really means all. So looking at the mission of Harford Public Schools, I think my biggest role is to make sure that we are ensuring that the educational experience of every student with a disability at Harford Public Schools matches that mission. So it's really important not simply to look at things like achievement scores. That's considered a lagging indicator. Okay, when we look at that type of data, that's what happened after the fact. What's more important is to look at those leading indicators, some of which Dr. Stone mentioned, those leading indicators: climate, culture, welcoming for all students, making sure that all of our investments in professional learning have application to students with disabilities, English language learners, and other students who are experiencing similar gaps in achievement for a variety of reasons. We want to make sure that every student, when we say all means all, every student has access to equitable opportunities, especially as it pertains to students with disabilities. Sometimes people have low expectations for certain populations of students with disabilities. We need to make sure our job is not to predict what they're going to learn. Our job is to make sure that they have access to those opportunities so that they can achieve their full potential. It's not up to us to predict what their potential is going to be. It's up to us to make sure that they have equitable access and not just a basic floor of opportunity anymore. We have real accountability for results for students with disabilities. So there's that access to those opportunities, higher level math and science courses. We need to make sure that students with disabilities are expected to engage in the same course progression as every other student, leading to college, career, community, and life readiness. We need to make sure that they are earning credits towards graduation. Our Every Student Succeeds Act contains very strong language also for including students with significant cognitive disabilities in general education settings and making sure that those students have access to the same opportunities to earn credits, to graduate with a standard diploma, and to be prepared for college. Yes, and there are many students with significant cognitive disabilities attending college, taking credit earning courses, and engaging in internships that lead to paid employment. So I see my greater role as making sure that we're really focused on all, meaning all, and being able to bring my expertise to your leadership team in order to make sure that we're being visionary when it comes to what success looks like for students with disabilities.
So in terms of being visionaries, right, we also have to consider the conditions that must exist at a system level, and then also right on the ground, if you will, right at the school level. And I'm wondering, Dr. Stone, when you think about redesigning of our district, what you believe the non-negotiables are. I heard non-negotiables here when Dr. Sellers was speaking. Certainly a non-negotiable for all of us here, not only at this table but at the district, is to ensure that every student has the access. And of course, another non-negotiable is that accountability piece, right? That we all, at all levels of the system, hold ourselves and each other accountable to ensuring that students have access to high quality experiences. So I'm curious as to what you think throughout this redesign, what those non-negotiables as they relate to resources for teachers, staff, and students. What are those non-negotiables?
I think it's difficult to have a conversation about non-negotiables without talking about equity. And in a large district that is as complex as ours, I think it's important to start with what are some equitable practices and ways that we can ensure that all students, all schools have what they need to be successful. And we talked about multiple measures of success, and there's also multiple measures of success for schools, depending upon what the needs are, what the theme is, and we have to look at programs that over time can grow and that can be connected to the larger Harford Public School system. There are teacher supports that are non-negotiables. We have a lot of new teachers, and as they work to form relationships with parents, with families, with stakeholders, we need to invest our time in making sure that they have the support that they need. We need professional development for our teachers, and we also need to start looking at different policies that are impactful around our discipline policies, the way that we engage and work with families when we are using special services for students. So I think those are some policies and some redesign things that we need to consider.
So I'm curious to hear more about the policy piece, and I'll get to that in terms of what perhaps system level policies we need to be thinking about. But you talked about teachers and making sure that there are conditions for teachers, right, for our adult learners to be successful. And so from going back to thinking about our students with special needs, Dr. Sellers, in providing support for our students with special needs, what resources and staffing needs do you need to ensure exist in order for our students to excel?
Well, I think, and again, Dr. Stone, mentioned it's really important to focus on equity. And in regard to the non-negotiable, if we're talking about providing equitable services for students with disabilities, when it comes to staff and resources, we definitely need professional learning for our teachers. Professional learning, as I said before, centered on meeting the needs of all learners, meeting understanding application to students with disabilities, to English language learners, and as I said before, other students experiencing gaps. For me, one of the non-negotiables is a viable MTSS model. I think we call it here SRBI, multi-tiered system of supports, making sure that we have teachers, new teachers who are mentored, who definitely are able to participate in professional learning communities with their colleagues, to be able to build their expertise while they're in the classroom. We've got a brand new teacher, very little teaching experience, possibly an internship coming into the classroom. We need to make sure that we pull them close and grow them fast. And professional learning communities have been shown to be the quickest way to make that happen. Understanding MTSS, understanding Tier 1, before you've applied any interventions, and more intensive interventions, we need to make sure that students first receive good first instruction. Okay, when it comes to students with disabilities, when it comes to English language learners, making sure that we have universal design for learning supports in that Tier 1 setting. Are we presenting information to students in multiple ways? Are we very print-centric, focusing only on students' ability to decode printed text when we have an English language learner who could be an off-the-charts genius but isn't able to decode on grade level the information that's being put in front of them? So using universal design for learning, multiple means of presentation of information, multiple means of engagement, making sure that we're activating students' limbic systems and getting them engaged in something that they want to engage in, something that's meaningful to their lives. And what I've often said to teachers is, if the curriculum doesn't seem to be particularly interesting, you better be interesting. Okay, and that takes mentorship. That takes expert teachers pulling other new teachers close and teaching them, cultivating those dispositions. I always say also, you can't intervene your way out of a core instructional problem. And when it comes to resources, using that MTSS model, having teachers sit down collectively with administration and look at data at Tier 1. How many students are responding to instruction? What's the percentage? Do we really have to look at student deficits, at what they bring to the table, or do we need to focus on what the adults in the classroom are doing and the instructional changes that we can make to try to influence that? So that viable MTSS model is really all about making sure you're allocating resources appropriately. Again, are we trying to intervene our way out of a core instructional problem? Or are we really making sure that good first instruction is comprehensible to every learner in the classroom? Then we can see, does that student need the core and maybe a little more? And then when we look at, do they need more frequency? Do they need more intensity, meaning smaller group? Do they need a longer period of time to work? Then we see if we go to tier 1. So, I mean, that's probably a show in itself,
Right.
Talking about MTSS and how we can really create a viable model here.
So, response to intervention or tiered approaches to meeting
Right.
student needs, right? Those I consider conditions, right? Conditions that must exist and must be in place in order for us to get at that equitable access that we're talking about. And so when I think about the English learner, I'm going to go back to you, Monica, and we're talking about the school practice level, right?
Right.
And what we as district leaders can do to support what happens on the ground and how we support our adult learners. There's another layer, right? And I'm even going to ask us that we think about it from an even broader perspective, the policy perspective. We're thinking and talking about redesigning of our schools from in some instances from a school perspective, programming perspective, but also as a system. How is it that we should be functioning as a school district to support high quality teaching and learning and access for all of our students? So from a policy perspective, what are there any education policy changes that can or should be made in order to bolster great teaching and learning in Hartford, or perhaps this is not just a Hartford issue?
No, absolutely, and I'd like to have two parts to that, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
So
sure.
our policy that we currently have in place, and we have to follow the rules of the state, so I'm going now to the state level, because this is the way we are structured currently. Our teachers who are TESOL and bilingual certified are the qualified teachers to provide services for our English learners. The reality, though, is that in almost every classroom, we have an English learner. Our English learners are with the general ed teacher a lot longer than they are with the TESOL and bilingual teacher.
Can you just explain TESOL and bilingual for those that might not know?
Yes, so TESOL is teachers that teach other languages, and it just doesn't have to be English, and they do not need to know the other language. They are trained to be able to service any student with any other language. Bilingual teacher, now these are teachers who are fluent in both languages, so they're bilingual and biliterate in both languages, and they are then the ones that service our students that have the same language that they know. So going back to where we currently are, the idea is, well, if you're an English learner, then the only teachers who are able to help you are teachers who are certified in either TESOL or bilingual. And we need to get away from that mindset. We need to change our mindset, because when we keep talking about all, we talk about equity, we are all responsible for all our children coming in. And something that you mentioned, Dr. Sellers, really resonated, is that we have to take a look that each student coming in has something to bring to the table. They all do. We may not be able to see it right away. And so what we need to do, our neighbors, our state neighbors, have done a policy change in their state in which every teacher coming into their school districts have to have a certain number of credits or credentials in the area of language acquisition. And that's something that we should do. And I know as Hartford, we can't do it on our own, right? Unfortunately, you can't just dictate that.
Right.
That has to come from the state. So we have to have a really strong partnership or conversations and saying how we can work together to make that possible. Because the reality is the number of our English learners coming into our district is not going down.
Correct.
It is increasing.
Correct.
And now with
Right.
what's happening across the country, we're getting an influx of our students that have a need to learn the language. Therefore, we need to start making those changes up above, because if not, we are facing a issue in which our teachers are not prepared. And we talk about professional development, I'm talking about language acquisition skills that every teacher needs to have. So we've, as a district, I just want to mention though, it's important to know that as a district, for probably 2 years ago, we have started with enrolling teachers in the ARCTEL program. And the district and the Board of Ed has been gracious enough to fund for teachers. So now we have teachers across the district who are duly certified in a general ed classroom. Batchelder is one of the schools that has that. But we need to expand that. And we can't do it on our own. It's too large of a need because we're continuing getting teachers from all over. So it's not just our teachers. Therefore, we need to make policy changes at the state. This is critical in order for us to get everyone who is capable of having the students that are in front of them and being able to give them what they need. That needs to be for everyone. If our neighbor state can do it, I don't see a reason why we can't follow suit in order for the needs. At the same time, I think that one of the issues that we may want to look at as a district is how our professional learning is structured for our teachers. Our teachers need the math and the science and the content areas, absolutely. But English learners the state has a CELP standards, which is the Connecticut English Language Proficiency Standards. And those are not just for our certified TESOL and bilingual teachers, it's for all teachers to have that language component within their curriculum. So we need to take a look at how our professional development is being developed and how can we provide that time during the school year, how can we roll that out? So that might be a need that we would like to take a look at to help. But I do want to go back to, and I don't want to sound redundant, but the equity piece is so important. We use that word a lot, but we don't really have enough time to talk about it like as we're doing here. And when I looked at the strategic operating plan, and I looked at it through the lens of English learners, there was one thing that really resonated with me, and that was that student leader. When do our English learners get to be that leader? I wasn't seeing that. So where was that equity part where they received that opportunity? So then we thought, well, we need to have some sort of tie-in. What happens during the day expanded after school. Well, what happened during the day, we need to make sure that we had a viable curriculum for our English learners. And we provided that through Middlebury Interactive Languages. The district spent resources and funding on that, and we were able to have a curriculum that was Common Core aligned, that was aligned to the CELP standards, and we started with 8 schools, we've expanded it to 26, and we'll get to 30, and we've been able to do that and sustain it without asking for more funding. It is throughout our district and available to all students because we have rights to that curriculum, which our coaches were part of writing that curriculum.
So you see how powerful I think that is when, and we know adult learning theory tells us that adults learn best when, one, they learn from and with each other, and then when they do so in context, within the context of their work environment. And so that's a perfect example of, a product that we in Harford Public Schools had to make our own, if you will, and then build our own capacity to sustain it and not be reliant on a product.
Absolutely.
Because now we've built our own muscle, if you will, in terms of practice and understanding of it and the implementation of it. And we've seen gains.
We have, and the other part of it, we were talking about, we can't just have a curriculum and have professional development. Our teachers not only have professional development during professional development days specific to the teachers that are implementing the ML curriculum, we have professional learning communities, which are held every month for our teachers. So that's an extra layer of that critical piece, and that's how we're able to sustain it.
Yes, yes. So we've heard state higher level of conditions through policy implications. We have heard on the ground making sure that there is a clearly understood process for interventions for our students at all levels. We've heard conditions that have to exist in terms of welcoming, safe environments. And so that kind of reminds us of the fact that it's not just one data point, right? And so I'm going to take us back to the very critical work that is happening in the next 4 to 8 weeks. We are going to continue to collect data from all of our stakeholders, and then we're going to mine and analyze the data around the principles that we introduced at the beginning of the show, so that we can then think about what are the best models moving forward for us. So that's one piece. There's another critical piece after that, when the Board of Education, per policy, decides on what it is that they're going to vote on. We shift to a redesigning phase, right? We have to then design programs. We're not saying we're going to throw programs out the window, and right, because there are lots of programs and strategies that are sustainable, that we are going to sustain and build upon. But we do have to talk about consolidations and school closures. And I wanted to start with this conversation around the guiding principles around great teaching and learning, because when we hear consolidation and school closures, we automatically narrow in on buildings, right? Schools, which ones are going to come off the line. And while that is part of the conversation, long term, what we want to aim, right, what we are committing to is making sure that all programs, right, allow our students to have that equitable access to high quality teaching and learning that connect to the principles that our community has told us matter most. Great teaching and learning, things that are focused and that are centered on our students, on our communities and our families, and that we're able to sustain moving forward, because at the end of the day, we know that there are cost implications to everything that we do. And so we not only look at it from a facility perspective, there are so many multiple perspectives that we have to look at. So it's not just looking at progress from one data point. And so the same applies to this process around redesigning our district. It's not just looking at redesigning from one perspective, the school, the building perspective, right? It is much broader than that. And so I'm going to just ask one question, and any one of you can answer. Anything else that we should be thinking about? Fascinating when you talked about the student leadership and student voice, which is one of my value sets, right? And I think we all here, we share that value set. Wondering what else we should consider as part of the process of, redesigning our schools.
I think one thing to look at is special populations. We speak a lot about students who are receiving special education services or EL or TESOL support, but we have others. Like, we have our gifted and talented students. We have our students who are middle school students, and that comes along with a different set of needs. And I'm not sure if by having so many schools, we're able to meet the needs of all of those different individual special populations. So I would hope that we would be comfortable having a conversation around the students. What are the students' needs, and where could we best meet their needs, and how can we work together so that all of the students have kind of the same equal access to the kind of programs that they deserve.
You're talking about making sure that we meet the needs of the whole student, right? And we're starting to do work around the whole student, the whole child, and identifying from a human development perspective, right? What are those conditions that we have to consider? So we can go on and on about conditions, policy level implications, from a practitioner lens, what needs to be in place. But I hope that we can continue the dialogue as it relates to the principles. You talked about meeting specific needs of students, and so later on, in one of our other shows, we will talk about what are those fiscal implications, right? So to making sure, you reference middle schoolers, to making sure that our middle school students have programming and rigorous teaching and learning experiences that also meets the needs of those unique needs. We know middle schoolers are just very unique in terms of their needs. How do we program around that? And so those are conversations that will come up in the next, some of our next series. So I want to thank our guests for being with us today. I urge you to participate in the restructuring of our school district by visiting our website at www.harfordschools.org to learn about the events you can attend and ways that you can share your voice. I thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next 4 parts of our 5-part series, Great Schools for All Students.